London, England, April 1942, and a short, unassuming Spanish man named Juan Pujol Garcia sits in a cramped office on Jermyn Street near MI5 headquarters, dictating yet another message to his German handlers through his British intelligence officer Thomas Harris. What the Germans believe they are receiving is critical intelligence from their most valuable spy in Britain, a man with a network of 27 agents spread across the United Kingdom, feeding him information about Allied troop movements, military preparations, and strategic plans. What they are actually receiving is the most elaborate deception campaign in the history of warfare, a web of lies so intricate and so convincing that it will fool Adolf Hitler himself and ultimately save thousands of Allied lives on the beaches of Normandy. Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo by the British because his acting skills rivaled those of the famous actress Greta Garbo, represents something the German High Command cannot possibly comprehend in their understanding of espionage and intelligence gathering. He is not just a double agent, feeding false information to the enemy. He is the living embodiment of a revolutionary concept in warfare, where carefully constructed lies, delivered through trusted channels, become more powerful than divisions of tanks or squadrons of bombers. In the spring of 1944, as Allied commanders finalise plans for the largest amphibious invasion in human history, they understand that success depends not just on how many ships and soldiers they can assemble, but on making the Germans believe those forces will land somewhere they will not. The story of how fake news won real battles in World War II begins not with grand military strategists or professional spies, but with a failed chicken farmer who couldn't get anyone to take him seriously. Juan Pujol Garcia was born in Barcelona in 1912 to a family of moderate means, growing up in a Spain that would soon tear itself apart in civil war. When that conflict erupted in 1936, Pujol found himself caught between the Republican and nationalist forces, managing through a combination of luck and cleverness to serve on both sides without firing a shot for either. The experience left him with a deep hatred of totalitarianism and a particular loathing for the Nazi ideology that supported Francisco Franco's nationalists. When war broke out across Europe in 1939 and Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine, Pujol decided he must make a contribution to what he called the good of humanity. He approached the British Embassy in Madrid in January 1941, offering his services as a spy against Germany. The British politely but firmly declined his offer, and they did so again when he returned 2 more times with the same proposal. To the professional intelligence officers at MI6, Pujol was exactly what he appeared to be, an unemployed hotel manager with no connections, no training, and no apparent value to British intelligence operations. What those officers failed to recognise was that Juan Pujol Garcia possessed something far more valuable than credentials or contacts. He possessed an imagination that could create entire worlds from nothing, a talent for deception so natural that lying became an art form, and a determination so fierce that rejection only made him more creative in pursuing his goal. When the British refused to hire him as a spy, Pujol decided to become a spy anyway, reasoning that if he could establish himself as a valuable German agent, the British would have to take him seriously when he offered to work for them as a double agent. In early 1941, he approached German intelligence officers in Madrid, posing as a fanatically pro-Nazi Spanish official who could travel to London on diplomatic business. He convinced a printer to create a fake Spanish diplomatic passport by claiming he worked for the Spanish embassy in Lisbon, demonstrating the kind of audacious confidence that would become his trademark. The Germans, desperate for intelligence from Britain after their spy networks had been systematically rolled up by British counterintelligence, accepted Pujol's offer and gave him basic training in espionage techniques, invisible ink, a codebook, and £600 to fund his operations. They sent him to London to establish a spy network and begin reporting on British military activities. Instead of going to London, a city he had never visited and where he did not speak the language, Pujol settled in Lisbon, Portugal, and began one of the most remarkable deception operations ever attempted by a single individual working alone. Armed with nothing but an English tourist map, a British shipping guide, reference books from the Lisbon Public Library, and copies of British magazines he found in shops, Pujol began fabricating detailed intelligence reports that purported to come from his travels across Britain and from a growing network of sub-agents he was supposedly recruiting. He described military installations in locations he had never seen, reported on ship movements from ports he had never visited, and created elaborate cover stories for imaginary informants who existed only in his fertile imagination. The reports Pujol sent to his German handlers were a mixture of genuine information gleaned from publicly available sources, complete fabrications that could not be immediately verified, and educated guesses about British activities that sometimes proved remarkably accurate through sheer chance. He described watching a convoy depart from Liverpool bound for Malta, provided details about RAF squadrons stationed at airfields across southern England, and reported on munitions production at factories in the industrial Midlands. The Germans, receiving intelligence that seemed detailed and plausible from a source who appeared to have excellent access, began to trust their new agent. They sent him additional funding and requests for more information about specific targets. What made Pujol's solo deception operation so effective was his understanding that good intelligence is not about spectacular secrets, but about the accumulation of small details that paint a convincing picture. He did not claim to have access to Churchill's war cabinet or knowledge of Allied invasion plans. Instead, he reported the kind of information a well-placed observer might reasonably obtain by talking to workers in pubs, reading newspapers carefully, and keeping his eyes open. When he made mistakes, and he made many in those early months working alone, he blamed them on his imaginary sub-agents, creating elaborate excuses for why particular pieces of information proved incorrect. He even killed off one of his fictional agents in a dramatic accident to explain why intelligence from that source had suddenly dried up, demonstrating the kind of detailed storytelling that would become crucial to the success of Operation Fortitude. British intelligence discovered Pujol's existence through an intelligence breakthrough that would prove decisive to the entire course of the war. They had broken the German Enigma code through the work of mathematicians and codebreakers at Bletchley Park, allowing them to read encrypted German military communications. When they intercepted messages from German intelligence headquarters in Madrid discussing reports from their valuable agent in London, the British realized they had a problem because they knew with absolute certainty that no German agents were operating successfully in Britain. MI5 had systematically captured or turned every German spy sent to the United Kingdom through a counterintelligence operation known as the double-cross system, running them as double agents to feed false information back to Germany. The messages about the agent in London were confusing because British intelligence knew they controlled all German spies in Britain, which meant either their security had been catastrophically breached or someone was running an independent operation. When MI6 officer Desmond Bristow interviewed Pujol in Lisbon and heard his story, he recognized immediately that the British had stumbled upon a counterintelligence treasure beyond price. Here was a man the Germans already trusted, who had been feeding them information for months, who had established his credentials as a valuable agent, and who was offering to work for the British as a double agent. Even better, Pujol had already created a fictional network of sub-agents that could be expanded and used to feed carefully crafted disinformation to German intelligence. The British moved quickly to bring Pujol and his family to Britain in April 1942, installing them in a house in Hendon, North London, and pairing him with MI5 officer Thomas Harris, who spoke fluent Spanish and would become Pujol's partner in the greatest deception campaign of the war. Together, Pujol and Harris began expanding the Garbo network into something the Germans found impossible to resist. They created 27 fictitious agents, each with detailed backstories, personality quirks, and specific areas of access to information. There was Agent 3, a Venezuelan communist working in Glasgow, who had recruited 3 sub-agents of his own. There was Agent 4, a waiter at a military canteen, who overheard conversations between officers. There was Agent 7, a Welsh nationalist soldier, who believed Garbo was working for Welsh independence. Each fictional agent was carefully crafted to have logical reasons for accessing the information they provided, and plausible limitations that explained why they could not obtain certain types of intelligence. The Germans found themselves managing not one agent but an entire espionage network, and the volume of information flowing from Garbo was so overwhelming that German intelligence in Spain made no further efforts to recruit additional spies in Britain. Pujol and Harris wrote 315 letters averaging 2,000 words each, maintaining Garbo's character as a verbose, fanatically pro-Nazi agent whose loyalty to the Führer's cause seemed unquestionable. The writing style was deliberately long-winded and packed with confusing details, forcing German intelligence officers to spend countless hours sorting through what Harris called confusing bulk to extract the intelligence they believed was hidden within. The British used Garbo to execute their first major military deception in November 1942, when Allied forces prepared to land in North Africa as part of Operation Torch. Garbo reported to his German handlers that he had observed a convoy departing from the Clyde in Scotland, and that his agents had noted the ships were painted in Mediterranean camouflage, suggesting they were bound for operations in southern waters. The message was sent by airmail from Lisbon and carefully postmarked before the landings occurred, but the British deliberately ensured it arrived in Lisbon too late to reach German intelligence, before the Allied forces hit the beaches. The Germans received accurate intelligence that proved Garbo had access to genuine military secrets, but they received it too late to do anything about it. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, sent Garbo a message apologizing that his information had arrived too late, but praising the quality of his reporting. They were sorry, but told him his reports were magnificent, and this response established Garbo's reputation as a source whose information was so valuable that the Germans would accept almost anything he told them in the future. For the next year and a half, Garbo fed the Germans a carefully calibrated mixture of genuine but militarily insignificant information, valuable intelligence that arrived too late to be useful, and complete fabrications about Allied activities that supported whatever deception the British wanted the Germans to believe. By early 1944, as Allied planners finalized preparations for the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, Garbo had become the most trusted intelligence source German High Command possessed in Britain, and they were about to be led into the most catastrophic intelligence failure in military history. Operation Overlord, the Allied plan to invade Europe across the English Channel, was the most ambitious military operation ever attempted, requiring the coordination of 5,000 ships, 10,000 aircraft, and 200,000 men in the initial assault. Allied commanders understood that German forces defending the French coast outnumbered the invasion force significantly, and if the Germans knew where the landings would occur, they could concentrate their armour and infantry to drive the Allies back into the sea. Success depended on achieving strategic surprise, not about when the invasion would occur, because the Germans knew it was coming, but about where Allied forces would land. The obvious invasion route was across the Strait of Dover to the Pas-de-Calais region of France, the shortest distance across the English Channel and the most direct path toward Germany. Hitler himself believed the Allies would land at Pas-de-Calais, and German commanders had fortified the area heavily while keeping powerful reserve forces nearby to counterattack any invasion attempt. The challenge facing Allied deception planners was not to create a belief in the German mind, but to reinforce an existing belief so strongly that the Germans would continue to believe it even after Allied forces landed elsewhere. To accomplish this, British and American intelligence agencies created Operation Fortitude, a deception campaign designed to convince the Germans that the main Allied invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, and that any landing in Normandy would be only a diversionary attack designed to draw German reserves away from the real invasion side. Operation Fortitude South, the portion of the deception aimed at protecting the Normandy landings, created a fictional army group stationed in southeastern England directly across the Channel from Pas-de-Calais. The first United States Army group, known as FUSAG, was supposedly commanded by General George Patton, the American field commander most feared and respected by the Germans. The Allies knew that, wherever Patton was positioned, the Germans would believe the main attack was coming, making him the perfect choice to command an army group that existed only on paper and in German imaginations. To make FUSAG appear real, the British created an elaborate supporting infrastructure of fake installations, dummy equipment, and false radio traffic. They constructed inflatable rubber tanks and plywood landing craft that looked convincing from the air, parked them in fields and harbours across Kent and Sussex, and allowed German reconnaissance aircraft to photograph them. They created fake military installations with tents, vehicles, and apparent activity that suggested massive forces assembling for invasion. British and Canadian signals units worked around the clock in the tunnels beneath Dover Castle, transmitting coded radio messages that simulated the communications traffic of an entire army group preparing for combat operations. The transmissions were encoded, but followed the patterns and procedures of genuine military communications, creating an electronic signature that German signals intelligence could detect and analyze, leading them to conclude that a massive force was assembling in southeastern England. But the physical deception measures, while elaborate, were not what made Operation Fortitude successful. The British had learned from previous deception operations that the Germans did not fully trust visual reconnaissance or signals intelligence, but they did trust human intelligence from agents they believed were loyal to the Nazi cause. This is where Garbo and the other double agents controlled by British intelligence became crucial to the success of the deception. Through carefully coordinated reports from multiple agents, the British fed German intelligence a consistent story that supported the existence of FUSAG and reinforced the belief that Pas-de-Calais was the target. Garbo's fictional network of agents reported seeing American divisions arriving in Kent, observed Patton visiting headquarters in Dover, noted the accumulation of landing craft in harbours along the coast, and provided detailed information about unit designations, commanders, and apparent preparations for invasion. Other double agents controlled by MI5 provided corroborating information that confirmed Garbo's reports, creating an intelligence picture so consistent and so detailed that German analysts accepted it as genuine. The Germans were receiving exactly the kind of multi-source intelligence confirmation that professional intelligence analysis requires before accepting information as factual, never realizing that all their sources were controlled by British intelligence and coordinated to tell the same lies. As June 1944 approached, Garbo faced his greatest challenge and his greatest opportunity. The Germans trusted him, they relied on his intelligence, and they had built their entire understanding of Allied invasion plans around information he and the other double agents had provided. But when the actual invasion began, Garbo needed to maintain his credibility with the Germans, while preventing them from realizing that everything he had told them was lies designed to support the Normandy landings. The solution British intelligence crafted was audacious and required perfect timing. Garbo would warn the Germans about the Normandy invasion just before it happened, providing accurate intelligence that proved his access to genuine military secrets, but sending the warning too late for the Germans to do anything about it. On the night of June 5th, as Allied invasion forces crossed the English Channel toward the Normandy beaches, Garbo sent an urgent message to his German handlers, requesting an immediate radio contact at 3 a.m. to pass critical intelligence. The message was so urgent that special arrangements were made to have German radio operators standing by through the night to receive it. But when 3 a.m. arrived, the German radio operator was not at his post, and Garbo's message went unheard. This apparent German incompetence worked perfectly for British plans, because when Garbo finally made contact hours later, Allied forces were already ashore in Normandy, and his warning arrived too late to affect the battle. The Germans received accurate intelligence about the invasion, but they received it after the landings had occurred, and Garbo blamed German radio operators for failing to be at their posts when he tried to warn them, reinforcing his image as a loyal agent whose valuable intelligence had been wasted through German incompetence. 3 days after the D-Day landings, with Allied forces desperately fighting to expand their beachhead in Normandy, while German commanders debated whether to commit their reserves from Pas-de-Calais to the battle, Garbo sent the message that would prove decisive to the outcome of Operation Overlord. On June 9th, he transmitted a detailed 3-hour message to German intelligence, carefully assembled from reports by his fictional agents across southeastern England, arguing that the Normandy landings were exactly what Operation Fortitude had claimed they would be, a diversionary attack designed to draw German reserves away from Pas-de-Calais, where the main invasion was still preparing to strike. Garbo pointed out that units from Patton's Fusag had not participated in the Normandy assault, that massive forces remained in southeastern England, and that all evidence suggested the Allies were maintaining their strength in Dover and Kent for the real invasion that would come across the Strait of Dover. The message reached German high command at the critical moment when Hitler and his generals were debating whether to send powerful panzer divisions from Pas-de-Calais to Normandy to drive the Allies back into the sea. Garbo's intelligence convinced them that Normandy was indeed a diversion, that the main Allied assault was still coming at Pas-de-Calais, and that moving forces away from that sector would be a catastrophic mistake. Hitler ordered the 1st SS Panzer Division and other powerful units to remain in position near Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Allied commanders had hoped the deception might buy them 2 days without German reinforcements reaching Normandy. Instead, Operation Fortitude kept German reserves bottled up waiting for the Pas-de-Calais invasion for 7 full weeks, allowing Allied forces to establish their foothold in France and begin the liberation of Western Europe. Juan Pujol Garcia was not the only source of fake news that influenced the outcome of World War II, but his operation represents the most successful example of how deliberately crafted deception changed the course of history. While Garbo was feeding lies to German intelligence that saved Allied lives in Normandy, other broadcasters were using radio waves to spread different kinds of fake news with varying degrees of success. The Germans employed radio propagandists who became infamous among Allied troops, broadcasters like William Joyce, known as Lord Haw-Haw, who transmitted from Germany to Britain in an affected upper-class English accent, attempting to demoralize British civilians and soldiers with pro-Nazi propaganda and gleeful reports of British casualties. Joyce's broadcasts attracted millions of listeners in Britain, some because his German-controlled station could report news the BBC censored, and others because his exaggerated style and obvious propaganda made him a figure of mockery rather than influence. American soldiers in Europe listened to Axis Sally, broadcasts by American-born Mildred Gillars, who played popular music interspersed with propaganda messages designed to convince American troops their wives and girlfriends were cheating on them while they fought overseas, and that surrender was preferable to death in battle. In the Pacific, American forces heard Tokyo Rose, a generic name given to several English-speaking female broadcasters of Japanese propaganda, the most famous being American-born Iva Toguri Dakino, who worked for Radio Tokyo playing American music and delivering pro-Japanese messages. But here is the crucial difference between these propaganda broadcasters and Garbo's operation. Lord Haw-Haw, Axis Sally and Tokyo Rose were obviously broadcasting enemy propaganda, and Allied soldiers recognized their messages as attempts at psychological warfare that were mostly ineffective and often unintentionally entertaining. Studies conducted after the war found that 89% of American soldiers who listened to Tokyo Rose recognized her broadcasts as propaganda, and fewer than 10% felt demoralized by them, while 84% listened because they enjoyed the music and found the propaganda amusing rather than convincing. The broadcasts failed because soldiers knew they were receiving enemy propaganda and automatically discounted everything they heard. Garbo succeeded because the Germans believed they were receiving intelligence from their own trusted agent, information gathered by loyal sources who were working for the Nazi cause. The psychological difference between obvious propaganda and trusted intelligence is the difference between fake news that fails and fake news that wins battles. When people know they are being lied to, lies have little power. When people believe they are receiving truth from trustworthy sources, lies become more powerful than facts. This is the lesson that Operation Fortitude taught about the nature of deception in warfare and the power of fake news when it is delivered through channels that the target trusts. The British understood that the Germans would not believe obvious lies or crude propaganda, so they constructed elaborate lies supported by multiple sources of apparent evidence, delivered through channels the Germans believed were working for them. They fed German intelligence exactly what German intelligence wanted to believe, reinforcing pre-existing assumptions about where the invasion would occur, and providing confirmation from multiple independent sources that all happened to be controlled by British intelligence. Juan Pujol Garcia lived the rest of his life in relative obscurity after the war ended. Fearing reprisals from surviving Nazis who might learn of his role in deceiving German intelligence, he faked his own death from malaria in 1949 with British assistance, and lived quietly in Venezuela working for Shell Oil as a language teacher. His wife and children believed he was dead for decades, only learning the truth when British writer Nigel West tracked him down in the 1980s and revealed his wartime role. Pujol returned to Britain in 1984 and was officially recognised for his service at Buckingham Palace. On the 40th anniversary of D-Day, he travelled to Omaha Beach in Normandy and met veterans of the invasion, men who queued up to thank him for his role in saving their lives by keeping German reinforcements away from the beaches where they had fought. He died in 1988, one of only 2 people to receive military honours from both sides in World War II. The Germans had awarded him the Iron Cross for his loyal service to the Reich. The British gave him the Member of the Order of the British Empire for his actual service to the Allied cause. The irony of these dual honours perfectly captures the nature of his achievement. He convinced the Germans he was their most loyal and effective spy, while actually being Britain's most valuable weapon in the greatest deception operation ever conducted. The story of how fake news won real battles in World War II is ultimately a story about the power of belief and the vulnerability of intelligence systems that rely on trusted sources. The German intelligence services were competent, professional organisations staffed by experienced officers who understood tradecraft and intelligence analysis. They did not fail because they were incompetent or stupid. They failed because British intelligence exploited the fundamental weakness in any intelligence system, the need to trust sources who claim to be working for you. By controlling all the sources the Germans trusted, the British could craft an intelligence picture that confirmed what the Germans wanted to believe, while leading them toward catastrophically wrong conclusions. The fake news that Garbo and other double agents broadcast to German intelligence was effective not because it was clever or sophisticated, but because it came from sources the Germans had no reason to doubt, and because it told them things they already believed were true. The lesson remains relevant today, in an era when information travels at the speed of light, and distinguishing truth from carefully constructed lies has become more difficult than ever. The most dangerous fake news is not the obvious propaganda that people recognize as false. The most dangerous fake news is the kind that comes from sources people trust, that confirms what people already believe, and that is supported by multiple streams of apparent evidence. When Juan Pujol Garcia sat in his London office, creating imaginary agents and fabricating intelligence reports, he was pioneering techniques of information warfare that continue to shape conflicts more than 80 years later, proving that sometimes the spy who broadcasts lies is more powerful than the general who commands armies.